here. Here we are with the second episode. Today it will be all on the larynx. The larynx is this structure we have in the neck. That is the home, we can say, of phonation. It is probably the most important part for phonation. And it is a structure that is very similar to complex structure of the joints into the body, as the hips joint. The hips joint, if you have an idea, you've seen a skeleton with all those muscles, can move in many planes of motion, as we say in fitness and training and biomechanics. Extend or flex, flexing and extending. It can adduct and abduct, and it can rotate, okay? Internal rotation, external rotation. Into the larynx we don't have exactly all those planes of motions, but we have two planes of motion mostly, and it is a very complex structure. We don't have this idea about the larynx because it's very difficult to see, it's very difficult to study, and it's very difficult to access. What it means? It means that to see what happens inside, we get by the airways, meaning the nose or the mouth, with some tubes and camera and light to see the proper vocal folds movement. The vocal folds are into the larynx. If you don't know that, someone of you perhaps it doesn't know it, it's better to repeat or to acknowledge that they are there. And from the outside what we see? You see there on the usual essential anatomy 5 tables that we have some cartilages. It is a structure that is very close to the skeletal muscle system, as I call it, but it is a very specific. What it means? It means first, it is not into the skeletal system, it is into the respiratory system. The respiratory system, as we said last time, it has a specificity in functioning and in materials. The skeletal muscle system, it is mostly bones and muscles and the tendons and the ligaments. The larynx is into the tube, that is the trachea, that is the tube going to the lungs. It helps with survival mechanisms as breathing, swallowing and coughing, and they are so much important that they develop into the uterus, meaning before birth, and we have many reflexes to control those. Phonatory system is phonatory function is a function that we have developed and evolved to have very specific to humans, as we have, and it is presented. And at the same time it is a secondary function, we can say that, a more complex function of respiratory system, and as we said, digestive, etc., etc. I will not repeat. So it is a joint into what? Into a tube of cartilages and into a part of our body that doesn't present direct insertion into the skeleton. So it is a sort of skeleton by itself, okay? It is made of cartilages. Those cartilages in the time calcify, meaning they get to a process of ossification that is age-related and gender-specific, meaning it changes according the hormones, and we will see this later. Which one are those cartilages? How is it made, this structure? You have the details on the side. It presents the larynx, cartilages that are 3 unpaired cartilages, meaning just one, and they are the thyroid, the cricoid and the epiglottis, I don't know how you, sorry for my English. We have 3 paired cartilages, the arytenoid, the corniculate and the cuneiform. And they will be more specific of the movements of the muscles to give tension and change in tension and adduction and abduction of the vocal fold. We have one bone, that is the hyoid bone, that is superior to the larynx. It is a very cool bone because it is a U-shaped bone, being horizontal and not attached to the skeleton. It relates to the skeleton by muscles, but it is a suspended bone, meaning a floating bone. And this will give, in the training and phonatory part of those episodes, many of the adaptations and the gesture we do to work on the sound, not only on the production of the tone, but really working on the sound. We will see this in some other episodes. The larynx is a very dynamic structure. What it means? It means that it evolves for all our life. And exactly, it starts developing for those functions, as I said before birth. After birth, it will change in the time quite fast, at a very high rate of speed of evolution and development until the 5 years old. Then it will slow down. It will have as a huge change in the teen years when there is the puberty, and then a slow aging process of some kind. What are the development characteristics and what are the characteristics that are going to develop? It will develop in consistency, meaning the biological materials, the tissue consistency. In size, the kid larynx is smaller than the adult's larynx. In position, yeah, this is cool too. Well, at the birth and until 2 years, it is very high in the neck. It is at the age of the cervical C2, C3, very, very high. At 2 years old, it comes down at C5, and at 5 years old, it gets down to C6, that is the cervical 6 vertebra, and the definitive position, it will be in teenage in between C6, C7. This is very subjective. The sides get to the mature size, meaning the adult size, in puberty. And it is a period that from a singing training point of view can be very frustrating, being very delicate, and you have irregularities into the pitch, into the color, into the control. Sometimes from day to day, sometimes from week to week, can be very dramatic, and you must be very careful not to force and not to ask too much, just to go cool, singing with the artistic desire of singing, not too much extension, not trying to force in the sound. It is a long period, meaning it can take 1 year for some. Women usually they have a shorter period, and very often after we have to train back the voice because we have to get back to the proper functions. Why we have to get back to those? When we are going to see the muscles, we are going to see that we have proper muscles. They are the intrinsic muscles and the extrinsic muscles. The intrinsic being the muscles that are into the larynx. And if you see again on the images, you see that mostly we don't see them. They are really inside, and they are hidden from the view and from the possibility of the study and seeing their movement and their biomechanics of those movements by the cartilages. Yes, they have to protect them. They are airways, so the cartilages are elastic and flexible enough to be able for proper swallowing, coughing and breathing function, but at the same time they have to protect. And they protect as they can, so they protect also from the view. And this is some of the difficulties in this fantastic instrument, to know exactly how they work and why they work in a certain way, what we do by training. We get to the muscles. 4 pairs of muscles. Pairs meaning unilateral, a left and a right one. And we have the thyroarytenoid, the lateral cricoarytenoid, the cricothyroid, the posterior cricoarytenoid, and one unpaired that is the interarytenoid or the transverse interarytenoid. You'll find with both names. There are 2 pairs of extrinsic laryngeal muscles, which are muscles that are attached to the larynx from the outside to the neck or to the head. And they are the thyroid, it connects to the hyoid bone, yes, and the sternothyroid, that it connects to the neck. The thyroid raise the larynx, the sternothyroid lower the larynx. What it means? It means that when I told you the planes of motion of the hips, and to take a parallel with those, we have those extrinsic muscles that with the intrinsic muscles move the larynx and change the angle of the cartilages, one relative to the other, okay? But we'll see that better when we get to the really training part. Today it was just to say, from an anatomical point of view, it is a joint into the neck, it is a joint into soft tissues, it is a joint done of soft tissues, meaning the part, the protective and structural part that maintain the form, the shape and the movement is of soft tissue, is connective, it's a cartilages are connective tissue. In the time those cartilages get ossified, meaning in the time they get by a process of calcification, that is important. Why? First, they lose a bit of elasticity and flexibility, and from a biomechanical point of view it's very important because you have to make the same movement and positionings by the intrinsic muscles, the work of the intrinsic and extrinsic muscles. You can't anymore force the air to work into the elastic capacity of the cartilages. And from a training point of view, also, if you want really to sing well, you will develop those functions of those muscles, and you will not just lay on the pressure air thing that it will be for the next episode. We will get to the respiratory system and how the air works with the vocal folds. So, to be more specific on the muscles, those muscles I told you are skeletal muscles. What it means? It means they work in the same, they work and they behave in the same way. The new research is telling that it is not something you find easily in the books, but you find easily in the articles, and that's why you find the links to the articles, because it's very important that you have access to those. And they say what? They say that exactly as for biomechanics of skeletal muscles, the intrinsic laryngeal muscles can work in an opposed or unopposed way. Meaning, for example, here we have no, I don't find it, so I go by myself. Here we are. The unopposed cricothyroid, for example, lengthens the vocal folds. It elongates it. The unopposed thyroarytenoid muscle shortens the vocal folds. When they work in conjunction, they simply change the tension and the vibration of the vocal folds, meaning the pitches. So if you really want to work on the pitches, you work with the opposition of those two muscles. How they oppose to those muscles? This is something that's why I told you it's a sort of skeletal muscle system by itself, but with the same logic. What we've seen by the last researches and studies, and now it's all in a rage, the plyometric problem of movement, is that when a muscle contracts, can do two things. It can shorten while it contracts, it can elongate while it contracts. Meaning, we have in the muscles usually agonist and antagonist. You have the idea usually that when we contract this muscle here, it will shorten, and the other muscle will relax in an unopposed way, and it will elongate by this relaxation. Then we want to invert the movement. It will contract by shortening, and this will relax by elongating. The thing is not exactly like that. It is like that when we work in an unopposed way, meaning in relaxation, we are not really producing a work. Why? Because when we produce a work, the ligaments of the joint will at a certain point meaning at a certain positioning and tension of the joint, contract the opposed function. When we really work in music and in singing, we are all the time shortening, lengthening, shortening, lengthening, shortening, lengthening. And nearly all the time there are the changes in dynamics, in rhythm, in color, in pitch, in height. You do very strong, very forte, and then you do pianissimo. You do a color and then you come away. You have all those contrasts, you change rhythm. You suspend a note, you make a long note, that is the isometric work, meaning they remain mostly in the same position, mostly, okay? But otherwise, they are all the time changing and opposing. And our system to protect itself by those forces, because when we shorten and we contract a muscle, we are producing a force. This force must go somewhere. And somewhere is the opposed function. You know, the Newton laws that to every action corresponds a reaction equal and contrary. We have this Newton law into our structure to protect the structure, to protect the function, and to remain able to change direction, change dynamics, change torsion, change the movement we are doing, not by just a passive absorption of this force, but by an active absorption of this force that will absorb the force into a spring-like way. What it means? It means, example, I want to contract and shorten this. I start shortening. In a functional system, when I shorten this, at a certain point, this other muscle will contract and it will start elongating by being contracted. Elongating by being contracted, it will have what we call the eccentric force inside, meaning it is absorbing the force that we are producing here. It will become part vibration of the vocal folds and part force, elastic force into this other muscle. And when they are into the eccentric, the muscles are the strongest. There is an exception, the gluteus maximus. It is the exception we know. I don't know if there are others. Known till now, no, just the gluteus maximus. When this one is opposed and elongated, it can contract shortening. And this one that was shortened, it will start immediately elongate. And if we do that many times without never relaxing both, it is what is called a pleometric activity. In some sort, when we sing, we are doing this opposition mostly all the time. It is untrained, unused voices or injured structures that do not oppose correctly. So, from what it means from a training standpoint, it means that those muscles that have those kind of functions, they are going to work synergistically in between them, but with the intrinsic and extrinsic, to give all the possibilities of words pronunciation, height of the notes, changes of the notes, change in the color, change in the words. there is a passive action of the vocal folds and there is an active action of the larynx structure. By what? By the action of the skeletal muscles. And today I'm talking about those. In the examples you see there, you will see that in one exercise it is just a repeated vowel that I'm asking, so I'm using those muscles in a more isolated way, and we train a more isolated function, meaning all the complexity of this structure and the possibility of movement of this structure. Sometimes we simplify the more simple functions to train by more simple movements and more simple synergistic functions, so that we can train specifically some muscles, some range of motions, and some development in the range of motion and in the function and in the strength. Take care. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. My. Sí. Exactly. The otherwise, it is exactly the opposite. We are making all the adaptations and all the functions of those muscles, getting able to skilled things as using and changing the tension of the structure and of all those opposed muscles. By what? By using consonants, and the consonants are very important because they use the intrinsic vocal muscles, intrinsic laryngeal muscles, and the height of the pitch. Since this is a very high skilled function, if you see, I'm not asking to do jumps or to change very suddenly the pitches, because always in the training we have to do something that gains a function into the possibility of the function yet known by itself of not being too difficult. So meaning we ask to train the synergistic things, but we don't ask at the same time also to change too many pitches, to change too many dynamics, to change too many range of motions. It will be singing, and it will be the practicing part of the singing. This is the preparing skills, developing skills that we don't have developed yet well enough, and how can I say, injury prevention, meaning we give the tones, we give the range of motion, we give all the soft tissues adaptations that in the time the training can elicit to serve the specific requirements for the singer. To recap,